Hi, I'm Kavan, founder at Nueconomy. This is our third installment in our Counterfactual series, exploring the pivotal moments that could have reshaped our economic world entirely. Today's thought experiment: what if India, not China, had become the world's factory floor? Imagine India's landmark 1991 economic reforms, led by Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, had arrived 2 decades earlier in 1971. Picture an India that dismantled the license Raj not after economic crisis, but during the optimism of the early post-independence period. Envision democratic India, not authoritarian China, capturing the manufacturing wave that would define the late 20th century. This isn't merely about swapping one Asian giant for another. The implications would have been profound and largely counterintuitive. Consider the labor dynamics first. China's factory boom relied on massive internal migration, millions of rural workers moving to coastal cities with minimal political voice. India's democracy would never have tolerated such displacement without representation. Yet India faced an additional constraint China never encountered: entrenched social hierarchies that would have complicated industrial labor organization. In our counterfactual, India's caste system presents a particularly thorny challenge for manufacturing efficiency. Unlike China's relatively homogeneous hand workforce, Indian factories would have confronted centuries old social stratifications that resist the egalitarian demands of modern production lines. Assembly work requires fluid cooperation across traditional boundaries, something that would have proceeded far more slowly in democratic India than authoritarian China. The result? Manufacturing would have remained far more geographically dispersed, spreading across hundreds of smaller cities rather than concentrating in mega industrial zones. Social fragmentation would have made the kind of massive, coordinated industrial complexes that characterized China's export miracle considerably more difficult to achieve. This dispersal would have fundamentally altered global supply chains. Instead of the hyper efficient, tightly coordinated networks we know today, we'd have witnessed more resilient but less optimal systems. Democratic India couldn't have demolished villages for factories or relocated populations at will. Supply chains would have evolved around existing communities, creating what economists might call democratic inefficiency: slower growth, but with built in social buffers. The environmental calculus presents a fascinating paradox. While democratic accountability might have prevented the worst excesses of industrial pollution, India's development trajectory could have been far more carbon intensive. Why? Unlike China's capacity for top down environmental mandates, democratic India would have struggled to impose green restrictions on economically crucial industries. Every environmental regulation would have faced political resistance from newly empowered industrial constituencies, further complicated by caste based political mobilization that could have fragmented environmental coalitions along social lines. Here's where the analysis becomes truly counterintuitive. India, as the world's factory, might have been less economically nationalist than China proved to be. Democratic systems typically struggle with long term industrial strategy, making India more likely to remain dependent on Western technology and management indefinitely. The indigenous innovation that characterized China's evolution from assembler to innovator might never have occurred under India's more fragmented political system. The geopolitical ramifications extend far beyond Asia. An economically dominant India would have fundamentally altered the Cold War's final decades. Unlike China's pragmatic authoritarianism, democratic India would have been a more natural Western ally. The strategic pivot to Asia that has defined 21st century geopolitics simply wouldn't have emerged. Instead, we might have seen deeper integration between Indian and Western economies, a genuine partnership rather than the strategic competition that characterizes Sino Western relations today. Consider the implications for global income inequality. China's authoritarian model enabled extreme wealth concentration while maintaining social stability through rapid overall growth. Democratic India would have faced constant pressure to redistribute gains more equitably, but this redistribution would have been mediated through India's complex social hierarchies. Affirmative action policies and caste based reservations in industrial employment might have created more equitable outcomes within traditional groups, but could have slowed aggregate productivity growth. The very social fragmentation that made democratic India more accountable might have made it less economically dynamic. The technology sector tells perhaps the most intriguing alternative story. India's English speaking advantage, combined with early manufacturing dominance, might have created tech giants decades before Silicon Valley reached its current prominence. We could be living in a world where Bangalore, not Shenzhen, became the global electronics hub, and where Indian, not Chinese, firms led the smartphone revolution. Yet here lies the central irony. India's democratic advantages might have proven economically limiting. The very accountability that prevented environmental degradation and labor exploitation could have slowed the ruthless efficiency that made China's manufacturing miracle possible. We might be inhabiting a world with higher manufacturing costs, slower global growth, but greater political stability and more equitable development. The financial implications deserve consideration. India's capital markets, developed earlier and more deeply, might have provided genuine competition to Western financial centers. Mumbai could have emerged as a rival to Hong Kong or Singapore, a democratic alternative for Asian capital allocation. This counterfactual reveals a profound tension in development economics, the trade off between democratic legitimacy and economic efficiency. China's authoritarian model enabled rapid, coordinated development but created systemic risks. India's democratic path might have been slower but potentially more sustainable. As we observe today's global supply chain vulnerabilities and growing concerns about authoritarian economic models, this alternative history poses uncomfortable questions about the relationship between political systems and economic development. So, here are the bold questions this counterfactual leaves us with. Has our current world trade system become too dependent on authoritarian efficiency? Could democratic manufacturing hubs have created more resilient global supply chains? And perhaps most provocatively, in our rush to achieve maximum economic efficiency, have we inadvertently empowered political systems that now threaten the very democratic values that originally created global prosperity? The choice between India and China as the world's factory wasn't just about geography or labor costs. It was about what kind of capitalism would shape the 21st century.